I'm grateful to the work of a couple of Latin American scholars, Grossfugel and Dussel, who've helped me to understand how the ideas of basically, if you look at, somebody was talking about here about, what they're reading in, in their courses here, and the same thing would be read, by the way, in my university in Victoria and probably most universities, and they're probably going to be authors are probably going to be people from Italy, France, Germany, England, or the US. That counts for almost all of it. Grossfugel writes about what he calls the four genocides or the four epistemicides of the long 16th century. Epistemicide is a word that I first ran into and used by Boaventura de Sousa Santos. And epistemicide is the killing of knowledge system, epistemology being, a knowledge system. And epistemicide is to kill a knowledge system. Grossfugel pulls together four distinct stories of epistemicide, stories that have mostly been treated as separate historical processes, but by pulling them together, he provides evidence, provides for how it is that European knowledge, this deeply colonized knowledge, has been able to spread around the world so much. The four epistemicides, all occurring, within the 16th century, are, first of all, the conquest of Al-Andalus. Al-Andalus, that was the Arabic movement into Europe, into the Iberian Peninsula. If any of you have been to Spain, you can see the evidence of the Arabic architecture, which is still there. And of course they were expelled, both Muslims and Jews were expelled from that whole Iberian Peninsula by the Catholics, by the Spanish. Second, 16th century epistemicide occurred with the conquest of indigenous peoples in Latin America. And we all know the stories, or some of the stories, about how mostly the Spanish, were over in Latin America, busy destroying, but not only picking up gold and silver, but very, very systematically eliminating the codex, for example, of the Inca people, which is the kind of the hard drive of the knowledge system of it was sought out by these conquistadores and destroyed. It was made in stone and it was destroyed. The third epistemicide was the slave trade. We know about the slave trade and the killing of millions of peoples in both the journey and, when they were being captured and when they arrived in some other part of the world. But the other thing that, that probably we don't think as much about is that in order to enslave people, you have to somehow dehumanize them. You have to think of them as not the same as you. And to dehumanize people, you need to demonize or denigrate their knowledge system. And so you never hear in that period of, all kinds of interaction between Europeans and Africa, but you never hear any, you never hear any stories about, about creation stories or knowledge that was shared. It's always about slavery, battle, and dividing up the place amongst the various European powers. A fourth epistemicide that took place during this period was the killing of millions of Indo-European women during this period. And these are the times when the charge of witchcraft, actually that extended quite late into not modern time, but certainly knowable time. That women's knowledge, because it wasn't men's knowledge, and because of the power that women's knowledge has had, was seen as terribly dangerous and so millions of women were. So these conquests, these 4 epistemicides, transformed Europe from being on the periphery of a kind of dominant Islamic, intellectual world to being center stage. What is important for us to understand is that these were both military and epistemological or ideological. At the height of the Al-Andalus Empire, the city of Cordoba now in Spain, it had a library of 500,000 books. 500,000 books. The largest collection of books in some of the monasteries of Europe, in the Christian areas of Europe at the time, would have been something like 5,000 to 10,000 books. Those 500,000 books in Cordoba and every other center of knowledge in Arabic Spain were burned. Every single one of them. And as I had mentioned before, they destroyed all the records that they could find of the Mayan, the Inca, the Aztec empires as well. Women's knowledge, which was largely oral, was simply silenced, as was the knowledge of Africa. African slaves were portrayed as non-humans, incapable of Western thought. And even Hegel, those of us like myself with a Marxist background, we used to read Hegel with quite a different eye. Here's a quote by Hegel. Hegel says, commenting on people from Africa, he says, "Among Negroes it is the case that consciousness has not attained even the intuition of any sort of objectivity. A Negro is a man as beast." The continued linguicide of indigenous languages in North America and throughout the world today is deep evidence that these patterns of conquest of the 16th century are still deeply entrenched in our own minds. There are those who say that we are experiencing a kind of a turning. And to see a group like all of you here today is just such evidence. So we hear about and we've participated in, things like the Occupy movement, or in Canada we have something called the I Will No More movement. We've seen in the last year, we've seen the Roads Must Go movement. We've seen the call for democratizing or decolonizing education in university after university in South Africa. You folks are bringing this conversation right in the midst of one of the important universities in the UK. And we even have a pope who talks about global capitalism as the dung of the devil. So it's a time, perhaps it's a time for us, those of us who are working in higher education, to feel an ability to move on. One of the things I think that we need to do is, as academics, we are wonderful at critique. We are the masters of why it didn't work, why it won't work, why it shouldn't work, why it'll never work, and all of that kind of stuff. But we're not very good at create. I don't know why. We leave that for somebody else. And so somebody else's have been creating all kinds of things. But so we have to move as people, as students and as people working in higher education systems, or as researchers, we have to move beyond, our marvelous ability to be critical. We have to be critical. But if we leave it at just being critical, we're going to, in another 30 years, there'll be another Lookman, and another Bud, and another Andrea, saying, what the hell did we do all that 30 years? Do you remember Lookman was calling us to do this? So I think that, you know, the call to several of you as you're going through saying what you're looking for, you know, that call to action, you know, you don't have to have it all sorted out before you act. You can just start acting. So I mean, that's the one thing that there's a lot of, you know, higher education narratives that support a decolonizing, call. There's this thing called the multi-world network based in India, and they run a whole series of academic conferences on decolonizing academic curricula with scholars from Asia, Africa, and South Africa. We have, even in my university, we have a decolonizing process that's on the go. In our case, it's around indigenous, you know, the indigenous reality. The main thing, well, there's a lot of things going on. The most important thing I would say is hiring indigenous scholars. I mean, if you want to decolonize the University of Sussex, you just take a look at, you know, at the demographics of your professoriate, and you start making some changes. That's going to change. That'll change the student body, and it'll change the you know, the content. I think I'll just wrap up here with a few questions. These are questions that I ask myself in the context of, you know, the challenge of a decolonizing agenda. And what do I ask myself? I ask myself, how do I decolonize, deracialize, demasculinize, and degender my own inherited intellectual spaces? How do I support the opening up of spaces, such as the one that we're having right here today? The opening up of spaces for the flowering of epistemologies, ontologies, theories, methodologies, objects, and questions, other than those that have long been hegemonic and that have exercised dominance over, perhaps even suffocated, intellectual and scholarly thought and writing of others. How do I contribute to building new academic cultures, more widely, new inclusive institutional cultures that genuinely respect and appreciate difference and diversity, whether it's class or gender, nationality, linguistic, religious, sexual orientation, epistemological or methodological issues? And how do I become part of a new architecture of knowledge that allows the co-construction of knowledge between intellectuals in academia and intellectuals working in social movements and civil society? In 1916, Rabindranath Tagore, many of you will have heard of Rabindranath Tagore. How many have heard of Rabindranath Tagore? He's a cool poet. He was a really, really way out there guy. And in 1916, he actually won the Nobel Prize. In 1916, he wrote this. I'll close with this. I know what a risk one runs in being styled an idealist in these days when the sound that drowns all voices is the noise of the marketplace. And yet, I feel that the sky and the earth and the lyrics of the dawn and the dayfall are with the poets and the idealists and not with the market men.
Yes.
Thank you so much for your time.